Welcome, dear friends. Welcome to this live stream for NT Cloud Monastery. I'd like to begin as usual by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. No chasang no chamesia na bawissa na me bawissa ti. So welcome again to this Dhamma session. Topic of this session posted, nothing to lose. Nothing to lose. So I'd like to look at a short sutta from the Samyutta Nikaya with a beautiful inspired uttering from the Buddha, an exclamation of the Dhamma that the Buddha gave is the heart of this sutta. And it begins with this exclamation. I just chanted it in Pali. I'd like to give you the meaning in English. So, no chasang, the Buddha exclaimed, it might not be. No chame siya, and it might not be mine. It might not be, and it might not be mine. And he went on to say, Nabawissa, it will not be. Namebawissati, and it will not be mine. It will not be, and it will not be mine. So this is the inspired utterance of the Buddha on this occasion. It might not be, and it might not be mine. It will not be, and it will not be mine. So this phrase, this sentence from the Buddha, it's said in the commentary to this sutta that this was an expression of the bliss of his realization of complete freedom from suffering. This was an expression from the heart of Nibbana. This was an expression of liberation. So I think it's quite interesting to look at this phrase and to try and perhaps explore it a little bit and see what it can mean for us. It will not be, and it will not be mine. First of all, it might not be, and it might not be mine. I sort of see a kind of progression here, almost through time. Do you? The Buddha is saying it might not be, and it might not be mine, and then it will not be. It will not be mine. Perhaps this is an expression of path, friends, that we can take on the Buddha's teachings and consider them, even though they don't necessarily totally make sense for us, or we haven't completely realized the truth of those teachings. So here the Buddha in the sutta goes on to explain when he's asked, how can we use this statement that you've just made? One of the bhikkhus asks him, how can we use this statement to liberate our hearts from suffering? How can we use this statement to practice for liberation? And the Buddha went on to explain Anicca Anattā Dukkha in relation to all our experience. So he explained to the bhikkhu that when we see things as lasting, as self, and as pleasant or agreeable or to be held to in any way, then we are going to continue to create suffering for ourselves. But when we can recognize the reality of Anicca Anattā Dukkha, impermanence, impersonal, and imperfect, those three attributes of reality, that it's constantly changing, that there is no self to be found in this constant flux and flow and change, and that it is inherently unsatisfactory, because there's nothing we can reify here. There's nothing we can hold on to. There's no lasting satisfaction to be found here. The Buddha said to the monk, this is the truth of the way things are. And when we realize this, this is an expression. This utterance is an expression of the truth of Anicca, Anattā, Dukkha. It may not be, and it may not be mine. So my experience may not be what it seems to be. And it may not be something that I can own. Whatever I'm experiencing, is there a sense of self or ownership to this experience? Can I be sure? Can I be confident that this sense of ownership or this sense of self are possibilities here? It might be, it might not be. It might be mine, it might not be mine. So this questioning of our experience, oftentimes we have some sort of an experience, whether it's a feeling or a thought or a perception, and we have within that experience, it's subtly or overtly imbued with a sense of self, isn't it, friends? So it's my feeling, it's my perception, it's my thought. This is very much the nature of our experience, unless and until we're fully liberated, because it's such a sea that we're swimming in, a sea of delusion. We're like a fish swimming in the ocean and not noticing that we're in water. It's kind of obvious if someone looks from outside at that experience of being in the ocean, but if you're in it, then you don't necessarily perceive it as such. And it's a bit like this with the sense of self. Whatever we experience is imbued with this sense of ownership or identification. And it's very difficult for us to quite get that, to quite see that. And so it might not be, and it might not be mine. It will not be, and it will not be mine. So when we can investigate the Buddha's teachings on not self, referencing and allowing ourselves to open to the reality of impermanence, of constant change, which helps us so much to be able to let go of the sense of self, because it's so fleeting, everything's so tenuous. When we recognize the nature of reality is to constantly be changing and shifting, and so we can pull the carpet from underneath the sense of self through our perception of anicca, of impermanence. But as we are willing to, put these teachings into practice and keep investigating experience and teasing out whenever we have a feeling of permanence, whenever we have a feeling of me and mine, ownership, or the conceit that I am, that there's something here that is a me, that has or owns or is this experience. Whenever we have these experiences of delusion, if we keep applying the Buddha's teachings, keep applying these three characteristics of anicca, anatta, dukkha, impermanence, not self, unsatisfactoriness, applying them to our experience, this experiential loosening of the grip of Mara, of ignorance, of illusion, happens for us. And from it might not be, and it might not be mine, to it will not be, and it will not be mine, we come to the place where we can more consistently recognize the truth of these three characteristics, and the letting go can happen, even within our experiences. I can be caught up in some idea, some view, and start to feel a sense of holding to that view. So a bit of a reactivity when someone questions that view, or a narrowing down of my field of awareness to make much of that view, that opinion, and suffering starts to happen. When I'm awake to the teachings of the Buddha, there can be that recognition. We start to get quite good, don't we, friends, at recognizing that feeling of clinging, of holding to, of identification with. It might be mine and it might not be mine. This does not need to be made much of. This does not need to be clung to. This is a source of suffering. So whenever we suffer, there is a sense of self present, and there is some kind of wanting or not wanting around that sense. Otherwise, we simply wouldn't be suffering. When we can come to the place where we can see it will not be and it will not be mine, then we can recognize that all of our experience is actually dhammas arising and passing. And we get to observe this. We get to witness this. In the witnessing and the observing, wisdom arises, insight arises. And so this can become for us a continuous stream of experience, the experience of letting go. So rather than holding, we recognize that holding and we're letting go of that. Just like a hot brick, just letting it go because it's hot, it burns. We don't want to hold it for even a moment. We have that recognition of the suffering that happens when our view is distorted, when there's a sense of self, when there's a wanting or a not wanting. So this phrase from the Buddha in this sutta, Samyutta Nikaya 2255. I put it in the chat. It's a really fantastic contemplation for us, and it's a wonderful summary of the path of practice. No chasang, no chamesia, na bawissa, na me bawissati. It might not be, and it might not be mine. It will not be, and it will not be mine. It seems very simple. It seems like a very simple phrase. But there is so much, is there not, friends, to consider here. Most particularly to question our experience. Whenever we feel that we might be unhappy, uncomfortable, incomplete, whenever there's a feeling of dissatisfaction, let's ask ourselves, it might be, it might not be. It might be mine, it might not be mine. So this is an invitation to question. And also it requires, the ability to be aware of our suffering. And let's remember, we can spend a lot of our time suffering without really picking up on it, without really noticing. We're sort of, as we're swimming in a sea of self-perceptions, we're also swimming in a sea of dukkha. We're swimming in a sea of suffering. So we can consider that we might be suffering without actually recognizing that we're suffering like hell. But when we practice meditation and we develop some degree of awareness around this body and mind, we can start to notice where the suffering arises. And so we want to be very sharp and very on the ball to pick up on when suffering is perceivable for us. And the more we meditate, the more we develop awareness, the more we will unearth and uncover layer after layer of dukkha, of suffering, of what is that? That holding to self, that holding to desire and aversion, the ignorance that keeps us running here in samsara. So let's consider, how we can open to the suffering that's here, and that we may not perceive it. We can't perceive it all at once. We perceive it gradually in stages. As my teacher Goenkaji used to say, the Dharma is merciful. Just as the Muslims would say, Allah is merciful, God is merciful. So the Dhamma, my teacher would say, is merciful. Why is it merciful? It's merciful in the sense that when we open our hearts to these teachings, we perceive, we understand just as much as we can handle, moment by moment, day by day. The mind will never be overwhelmed by the Dhamma because we open to it in stages, and the truth gradually dawns. It's a gradual path for most of us. Occasionally there might be some sudden insight, some jump forward, as it were, some opening that happens, but always when we're ready for that, when we can handle the shift in perception, when we can handle the freedom that comes. Because, it's very interesting. It's as if Nibbana were a very bright light, and we have to adjust our vision gradually in order to open to and to be able to receive the fullness of that bright light. How do we open to that? We gradually adjust. We gradually come out of the dark, and our vision slowly adjusts to this much light, and then a little bit more and a little bit more. And in the end, we're ready, and we can open to the fullness of the dazzling, bright light that is Nibbana. And so in the same way, we can open our hearts to the fact that there may be suffering here, and start to investigate, how does it manifest? And layer by layer, that suffering will reveal itself, and we can face that, and we can let go of the suffering that's there. So how do I recognize suffering here and now? Through our meditation practice, isn't it? We start to observe the body and mind, and we start to notice where there's tension, where there's stress, where there's painful feeling. I'll have a thought arise in the mind that may be unwholesome, and I may have been having these kind of unwholesome, cruel thoughts for a very long time, and may have become acclimatized to them, kind of used to having those kind of thoughts, and not really have a problem with that. When I start to practice meditation, a cruel thought arises in the mind, and I may begin to recognize how, in association with that cruel thought, there's some discomfort in the body, there's tension, there's a stress. The belly tightens, the throat tightens, there's some heat in the chest, whatever it may be. That cruel thought may be associated with some pain in the body. And certainly in the mind, there will be a sense of agitation, unease. The Buddha said when people are used to, habituated to cruelty, even just thinking cruel thoughts, never mind acting and speaking in cruel ways, when there's that habituation to cruelty, when that person has a moment of rest, when they don't have anything else to do, there's nothing on their mind particularly, they're taking it easy, such a person habituated to cruelty, will feel unease, will feel agitation. The Buddha said, like the shadow of a mountain, as the sun goes down behind the mountain, that shadow spreads and envelops and overwhelms, covers over the ground before it. In that way, the heart, a cruel heart, a heart that's habituated to cruel thoughts, acts, or deeds, will be overshadowed with unease, with agitation. And we might not notice it. That's the thing. We can go through our day without any idea of the suffering that's happening. But when there's a moment of quietude, a pause, or in our case, when we meditate, immediately we can start to perceive the agitation, the distress that's there for us. And so this habituation to cruelty is something we can consider. I'm not saying that we're cruel people. I'm not saying that you have cruel thoughts, but we may have from time to time, or even often, unskillful thoughts. We may have habits that are not so wholesome, not so good for us, or even on a very subtle level, there may be some degree of desire or aversion in the heart from time to time, or confusion in the heart from time to time. So we can begin to unearth these things, remembering that this is all past karma. So these are forces, energies, unfortunate, unfinished business that has been there for a very long time. And as we meditate, these energies, these forces of Mara, of ignorance, can begin to reveal themselves. And so we get to open to the suffering bit by bit as we can, in a way, as we make space, as we have the resources to handle the suffering, we can perceive that suffering. And it's like a fish in the ocean, fish in the ocean can't necessarily do anything about it. Say being a fish in the ocean was a problem. The fish can't do anything about it because it doesn't have the capacity to get out of the ocean. But if that being were to evolve a set of lungs that could breathe the air, then it could consider the possibility of getting out of the ocean and making its way onto dry land. We start off, most of us in our practice, like the fish in the ocean. We can't imagine anything other than this life of endless stress and suffering, acquisition, getting away from what we don't like, rolling around in suffering, in delusion. But as we follow the Buddha's teachings, we meditate, we develop our understanding and appreciation for the reality of anicca, anatta, dukkha, change, not self, suffering. And we start to develop the capacity to consider freedom from all of this ocean of suffering. And we start to move and incline towards the ocean of Dhamma, the ocean of wisdom, realization of peace, of well-being. And yeah, I suppose what I'm saying is this happens in stages. And the Dhamma is merciful because we just always, but always receive, experience, meet the dukkha that is bearable for us, that is ready, we're ready to face. My teacher used to say the path of practice is like plowing through the field of dukkha. And I love this image because it's a sense of there's some effort involved. We have the tools to do the job, and it's a process of one row at a time, one piece of earth at a time that's moved and sort of opened up. And one row at a time as we plow through the field of suffering. We get to understand through this process our common predicament, we get to grow a lot of compassion, and we start to see, as we open to the very relieving reality that this suffering is not personal, we can really, in a way, paradoxically own it more fully in order to then be able to let go of it. You know what I mean? It's like we as long as we're pushing our suffering away and not wanting to face it because we think it's something we should feel bad about, we should feel guilty about, we don't get very far. But when we can open our hearts to anatta, this understanding of not self in our experience, in this experience, then we can really appreciate the suffering. We can really look at it. We can face it. We can allow, for example, vicious, mean, cruel, negative thoughts their day. We can allow them their space because we're not taking them personally. I'm not a bad person because unwholesome thoughts arise in my meditation practice. Doesn't make me a bad person. There is dukkha. Look at that. Wow. Let's see if there's any more of thoughts like this. Allow the stream of negativity to flow on. When we don't take things personally, we can really open to all that's there. The Pandora's box, the lid can open, and all the rubbish, all the garbage, all the darkness can come out, and we can take it. We can observe. We can allow space and time for, perhaps one could say, the traumas of the past, the misunderstandings of the past, the pain and suffering that's been experienced, the ignorance that has caused pain and suffering to be inflicted on others. We can allow these things the light of day. And what do when they're allowed? When they can be observed with wisdom, with compassion, because these qualities of wisdom and compassion quite naturally grow as we observe experience in this wise way, following the path, as wisdom and compassion are brought to bear on the miserable, the evil, the suffering, the confusion, the trauma that may arise, the dukkha in short, then this suffering can arise, last for some time, and then quite naturally it will pass away. And that much freedom is experienced right there. So this ability we have to open to suffering gradually enables us to really come to a fullness of appreciation of our human predicament, that we're all in the same boat, that there is no one better or worse or even the same as another. The personhood can start to fall away. We can recognize it might not be mine. It will not be mine. We can start to free up. And this beautiful statement of the Buddha was his expression, one of his expressions of the journey that he undertook through the field of suffering to realize the perfect peace of Nibbana, when he exclaimed, "It might not be, and it might not be mine. It will not be, and it will not be mine." So we have nothing to lose. Whatever we think is mine, whatever we think I need to hold on to, we can recognize it will not be mine. At some point, we'll get to that place where we recognize we can let go of that. We can let go of that sense of self. We can let go of that ownership. We can let go of that sense of control, the need to control our life, the lives of others, our destiny. And we can start to experience some peace, some freedom. And there's a beautiful sutta comes to my mind, which I've also put in the chat, relates to this topic in so many wonderful ways. It's the simile of the snake sutta, uh, Alagarupama sutta. So many teachings in this sutta that really speak to letting go of that which doesn't exist anyway. There's nothing to lose. The idea of something that we have when we have a sense of self and a sense of wanting or not wanting, that sense of something that is created through these energies of ignorance, it doesn't actually exist at all. When we let go of the ignorance, we let go of the illusion of self, the illusion of anything to get, to have, or to get rid of. And so we can start to experience, appreciate cessation, the letting go. We can happily, comfortably, over time in our practice, get used to and begin to really enjoy that taste of freedom that comes from letting go, just giving it up, giving up control, giving up possessions, not necessarily giving all our possessions away unless we want to ordain as monastics, but giving up that sense of ownership and that sense of neediness and that sense of me and mine. You know, we can do this much. We can allow for cessation. Now, this statement of the Buddha is quite interesting when he says, it might not be and it might not be mine. It will not be and it will not be mine. It's very close to the views of a lot of the wanderers at the time of the Buddha. I've digressed a bit. I'm going to come back to the simile of the snake sutta. But a lot of wanderers at the time of the Buddha had the nihilistic view, Uchedawada. They had the view that there's nothing here that I can own or control, a very wise view. Hence, therefore, at the time of death, it's all over, there's nothing left. That it's a kind of material view in a way, the nihilistic view, isn't it? It's like that we're like machines. These bodies and minds, we're just programmed. There's nothing here that lasts, and after death, that's it. So in a way, when one has a nihilistic view, one could be very depressed, one could be very feel there's no meaning in life, there's nothing to pursue, there's nothing to strive for. Or one could develop a view, well, it doesn't matter what I do, I could do anything, good or bad, really doesn't make any difference. Why don't I just indulge in all sorts of unwholesome things? Because there's no punishment, it doesn't matter. I can indulge all my baser instincts and just be a thoroughly uninspiring person. Who cares? So this nihilistic view is a real turning away from the Dhamma, turning away from the truths, the laws of karma, which are so very important for us to recognize. You know, you do good, there's a good result. Harm, and there's a harmful, painful result. Which way do you want to go? If we neglect to appreciate these laws, these universal laws of karma, then we're really in a mess. You know, we have no guidance in life. We have no sense of the nature, the way things are, and there's such a sort of beauty to the Dhamma, to the truth of how things are. It's so beautiful. The Buddha was speaking a lot to practitioners, wanderers who were nihilists, and he tried to encourage them to let go of this unwholesome view and to open to the truth, which is that there is dependent co-arising. There is a interdependence of all things. all things affect one another. And so there is a imperative for us to chart our course in this web of interconnection that we find ourselves in, to make it good, to do what, with whatever agency we have, abstain from harm, abstain from cruelty, do good, and above all, purify our hearts. There is a way out of suffering. And the Buddha, through his realization, his own endeavors, found that way. And so the Buddha's teaching is far from a nihilistic teaching, but the Buddha would say to the nihilists, you're very wise, you're very close to understanding the truth of the way things are. He praised those who had this sort of more, one could say, negative or more of an averse relationship with samsara. He praised them above those who were eternalists, the other side of the spectrum of views. So the spectrum of views, there's the nihilistic view that nothing matters, there's nothing that holds together, there's no significance to anything. And the eternalist view, which is that there is a universal, everlasting something here, which lasts through time, and after death, this continues in a way unchanged. So these two views are kind of an aversion towards self and a reification of self. The Buddha, of course, was teaching the middle way, which gives us the understanding that there is no self to hold on to, but we can open to the bigger picture. And there are certain laws, there are certain laws of nature that we can appreciate, and that will enable us, through that appreciation, we will be able to free ourselves from samsara. And so the Buddha was, above all, he praised the nihilistic end of the spectrum over the eternalist end of the spectrum. Why? Because there's more wisdom in that letting go, that turning away that a nihilist has. And so for those who had the nihilistic view, the Buddha could quite easily encourage them to recognize actually there is such a thing as karma, cause and effect. It is operating, and you do well to appreciate that and to work with that in such a way that you are increasing the happiness and well-being in the field and letting go of the gross suffering that happens when there's unskillful action, thought, or words. And that there is this law of dependent arising, codependent arising, dependent origination came to the Buddha. This understanding of the way of samsara came to the Buddha after he became the Buddha. He recognized that it's ignorance that creates sankhara. Sankhara are born of ignorance. It's like the mind and body arise from this energy of ignorance that is like a consciousness that it has unfinished business. When we're ignorant, we're not seeing the way out of samsara. And so there's this momentum to create namarupa, name and form. And so the whole experience of life flows on from that. And so the continuation of that ignorance continues to grow and develop as we steep ourselves in illusions of selfhood, wanting, not wanting, and so forth. And we're creating karma every time we desire something, every time we reject something, we're creating more suffering. And so this whole stream of suffering flows on. Dependent origination. Ignorance is the cause of suffering. And so the Buddha could teach the nihilists this, and they would understand it very quickly, oftentimes. The eternalist mentality, which is more steeped in greed and desire, Just as the nihilistic approach has a flavor of aversion, so the eternalist approach has a flavor of greed and desire. For such an approach, for such people, and I know because I'm one of them, the idea of this might not be mine and it will not be mine, this might not be and it will not be, these concepts can be very frightening, and one can really turn away from the teachings of the Buddha because of the fear of annihilation. So an annihilationist, a nihilist doesn't have that fear. They almost embrace that possibility, whereas an eternalist will be afraid of that, one could say, extinguishment, that obliteration, because the self is more tightly held to. And we can see in a number of suttas where the Buddha went to visit gods and pointed out to them, you're not eternal. There is an end to the life of gods. It may be a very long life, but eventually it comes to an end. You need to recognize that. And for the gods, what a frightening thought. These teachings initially would be very terrifying. And so it is for many of us who hold to a sense of life, who have a sense of wanting it to continue, who don't want to see anything coming to an end. We want to open to the peace and well-being that result from letting go, and just to really take in these teachings. So there are many people who may immediately recognize and find great, I could say, inspiration in this statement of the Buddha's. It might not be, and it might not be mine. It will not be, and it will not be mine. Those of a more annihilationist bent may find this really nourishing. Those who have a more eternalist bent, a little bit more craving in the heart, may find this rather challenging. It might be a bit sticky, might be a bit incomprehensible, and so even more reason to really open up to this statement, consider it, contemplate it, and bring in the understanding of the three characteristics of anicca, anatta, dukkha. Bring them in to every experience. Question, is there any suffering here? Is there any sense of self here? And open to that suffering and see the letting go. Allow the letting go to happen. So I wanted to mention from Alagadupama Sutta, the simile of the snake, there's just one particular piece which I will mention now because a little bit out of time, but there are many amazing similes in this sutta to help us to recognize this might not be and it might not be mine. This will not be and it will not be mine. And I'm going to read you the passage here from Majjhima 22, where the Buddha speaks very strongly to the bhikkhus in such a way that really emphasizes our path of practice. Let me read it to you to conclude. So the Buddha says, therefore, whatever is not yours, abandon it. When you have abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. What is it that is not yours? Material form is not yours. Abandon it. Feeling is not yours. Abandon it. Perception is not yours. Abandon it. Mental formations, sankhara, are not yours. Abandon them. Consciousness is not yours. Abandon it. When you have abandoned these, this will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. What do you think? If people carried off the grass, sticks, branches and leaves in this grove where the Buddha and his disciples were sitting, or they burned them, they burned the vegetation, or just did whatever they liked with this vegetation, would you think people are carrying us off or burning us or doing whatever they like with us? And the monk said, "No, Venerable Sir." So too, the Buddha continues, whatever is not yours, abandon it. When you've abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. And he repeats the 5 khandhas, these 5 aspects of our experience: body, feeling, perception, thoughts, and consciousness. They are not ours. Abandon them, just like the trees outside, the leaves, the twigs, the grass. How much of a sense of identification with those do we have? Can we cultivate the same degree of letting go in relation to what feels so close to home, what feels so much me and mine for us, like the ocean the fish is swimming in? Can we consider letting go? Can we consider stepping back? Can we remember that these things are surely coming to an end? They're surely going to cease at some point. And actually, it's not as the annihilationists would see it, that's that, but rather, can we very consciously, wisely, insightfully let go of these things in order to free our hearts from suffering, in order to open to the truth of the way things really are, and to experience the unshakable heart that is the heart that's free from greed, hatred, and delusion. Ayya. So thank you very much for your wise attention, dear friends. And I'm going to have a look at the chat, give you a chance if anyone wants to ask any questions or share any reflections. We have 10 minutes or so. Do feel free to write any comments or questions. And meantime, I'm just looking through, and hi Sud, hi Margaret, Manal, Somin, Edward, Jayantha, John, Louis, King Nadish, Bhumika, Gregory. Calm Down Stress Free, that's a great name. A really good teaching, that name. Calm Down Stress Free. And Aaron, thank you. And also Ellie, thank you for your presence, for being part of this live stream, and also to everyone who comes along later to take in these teachings. Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions or comments, and that's grand. So we can finish. And I'd like to conclude, friends, with together 3 sadhus: deep gratitude and appreciation for our teacher, the Buddha. And I'd like to share with you, to conclude, one more time, the statement of the Buddha in Samyutta 2255, where he exclaimed, he burst forth with an utterance, and it was this: it might not be, and it might not be mine. It will not be, and it will not be mine. May we all consider this carefully and find our way to the complete letting go that is Nibbana. Sadhu, 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 anumodami.